Hello and welcome guys to another video, and today we have a track guide for the GT3s at Bathurst. So let's have a look at the Hotlap and then we'll have a look at the guide. So going into the first corner, we're looking at the 100 and we're looking at the 50-meter board. Brake about halfway between those two boards, and then we want to turn in as we get to this line where the barrier changes from silver to yellow. As we get to that line, we begin to turn into the corner, apex about halfway around the curb, and get onto the power at around about this point. So very aggressively onto the power, and just unwind the steering wheel as early as possible, and we can use all this exit curbing. Just be careful to not invalidate, but you should be able to use a lot of this curb with most cars and it won't really unsettle the rear. Now going into turn 2, we're looking for the escape road on the left hand side, and we're braking as the car is basically in the escape road. Braking down into second gear, and we turn in about a car length or two before we get to the start of this Marshall Post barrier on the left hand side. In second gear, try and keep as close to the apex curbing as possible. Don't go onto it. Get on the power as early as possible and then unwind the steering wheel. Make sure you rev out that second gear. We can use all this exit curbing. Just be careful not to clip the wall on the exit, because obviously that will be an invalidation. Now for this left-hander, we want to just keep the car as stable as possible, and on the exit of this corner the wheel needs to be as straight as possible because we're going to brake for the hairpin. So the turn-in reference is about the start of this black barrier, and it's just a very slight steering angle, and then we want to straighten up the wheel, and as we straighten up the wheel we immediately get on the brakes, let it drift out over to the right hand side into second gear, and then bring it back in to the apex of the hairpin, which is very late, and get on the power up the hill and then unwind the steering wheel. It's very easy for the rear to let go on that corner, so we want to try and stay as stable as possible and straighten out the wheel as early as possible. Now make sure you use all of the track on the exit here. Over to the right here, just this little right kink, keep it nice and tidy. And then the barrier opens up on the left hand side. So what we're going to do is we're going to allow the car to go over to the left here. And then we turn in just as we come under this tree here. And we're aiming to apex at the end of this curbing on the right. A really late apex. And that allows us to basically straight line the exit here. And then we're going to get as close to the barrier as possible, basically where this little sign is. And then keep it over to the left side. Now over to the middle of the track, bring it back to the left, just trying to keep it stable through this left kink. And then what we want to do is we want to allow it to drift over to the right to open up this left-hander. And we're turning in just at this gap, basically, between the start of this E and the end of this D. This area here, that's basically our turning point again for the left. And we can use a little bit of this curb in some cars, but it's better to avoid it because if you do it wrong, it's going to spit you out onto the barrier. So just get nice and close to that curb, full throttle for this corner, and then allow it to go back over to the right. We can use a little bit of that curbing if needed, but it's very easy to use too much of it and hit the wall, so it's better to avoid it. Now, for this left-hander, some cars are going to be able to do this full throttle, some are not. Some cars will be able to do it depending on the track conditions. So usually, with most cars, you lift and turn in as you get to the start of this red and white curbing or the start of the marshal post on the right hand side. Now, here in the Honda, it's down to about 40% throttle, and then as we get back to this inside curbing, then we start getting back on the power. So just modulating the power with a Honda. But like I say, every car will be different, but most of them you lift at the start of that marshal post, and then you get on the power around about the apex. Now, this is the most tricky section, the downhill. So we're bringing it over to the left to open up this corner. Now we brake here. Now this is about 3 car lengths before this overhead barrier. So quite early. And the reason for that is we want to basically keep the car on the ground. Because if you go full throttle there, the car will lift off going over the crest. So just a little bit of braking and off the throttle to keep the car on the ground. And then as we get to the start of this advertising board on the inside of the right-hander, we're going to increase the braking pressure. And then we want to aim to put the left tire on the inside of this red and white curbing. And just all the time trying to keep it as stable as possible. So onto the brakes, putting the left side tire on the inside of that curbing. And then straightening up the wheel and aiming for this right-hander. Down into second gear, more braking. Basically, as we go down that downhill section, when we have a lot of steering input, we don't want to be doing much braking. But then when we have those little spurts of having the wheel straight, that's when we want to do the most braking, because that's going to keep the car stable. Now into second gear, getting it really tight and close to this wall on the right hand side. And then as we basically get to this black advertising board, just after that point, we will straighten the wheel and we'll aim for the left side. And then we want to get as close to this barrier as possible. And you see the car will almost jump a little bit. So you get off the brakes, because otherwise if you're on the brakes as it jumps, it'll just lock up as soon as it touches the ground. And then as it settles, we want to get back onto the power. So as the wheels touch down, we get back onto the power. And we want to get as close as possible to this barrier on the right hand side. Straighten up the wheel and just get nice and close to that barrier. You can use a little bit of the curbing. Now up through the gears, up into third gear. Now we want to get over to the left hand side to open up this right hander that's coming up. So we bring it over to the left, full throttle. And then as we cross, there's a little drain here. As we cross that, then we start going straight and we're aiming for this, I think that's marshal post over in front of us. Now we brake around about here. The best reference is you've got coat tire and then coat tire again. And it's the second last one. As we pass this one, that's where we get onto the brakes. So as we pass the second last one, get onto the brakes just a little bit, just to keep it over to the right hand side. We don't want to lose too much speed. We just want to keep it over to the right. And then as we pass this little drain here, just after we pass that, we're then going to get hard onto the brakes. So there's this advertising board here. This is the usual braking marker. is as we pass this line here, we get hard onto the brakes. Turn it in nice and early because we want to hook the car. There's a bit of camber here, so we want to hook the inside of the car on this camber, and that'll help us to get turned around the corner. Get as close to the barrier as usual, and we're actually getting on the power at around about here. So it's very early on the power. It's just before you see there's a higher barrier here, and then it goes to a lower barrier. So it's just before that change. And that's also the apex reference you can use. But if we get on the power really nice and early, the car will naturally drift out to the exit barrier here, but it'll allow us to get a better exit because it's vital that you get a really good exit out of that hairpin and you don't lock up the brakes because we have such a long straight until the next corner. Now, this little right kink is very easy. Basically, just keep it on the left side of the track, and as we pass this barrier here on the left hand side, just a little turn of the steering wheel, full throttle, and we want to bring it over to the right hand side for this heavy braking zone. Now, we've got the 150 meter board and we've got the 100 meter board on the right hand side. Brake about halfway between those two boards, and then we turn in just after we pass the 50 meter board on the right hand side. Turn into the corner, down into second gear, and we basically apex around about halfway around this curb on the left hand side, and then immediately allow the car to go over to the right hand side, straighten up the wheel, and you can use a little bit of this curbing to basically just hook it round the corner. Be careful not to get on the grass because it just unstabilizes the car. And then on the exit here we can use this curbing. Again, just be careful not to use too much because it's quite high and then can unsettle you and just give you a really bad exit. Now for the last corner, we're looking at the 100 and we're looking at the 50 meter board. Brake about halfway between those two boards. And then we turn in around about just after this pole here on the right hand side. Just after we pass that pole, turn into the corner, and we apex quite late, just before the curb ends on the left hand side. We want to apex the corner, and then straighten up the wheel, get on the power as early as possible to finish off the lap. That is it for the track guide, guys. As always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and see you again next time.